Hello, my name is S.K. Williams, and due to certain technical difficulties, a video I wanted to make and upload so that it would be released on the 29th of March 2026 could not be loaded. I have to take care of a certain technical issue with it. However, I've loaded part of the script to a text-to-speech format. This way, I can load the original intended video in a certain form. It won't be me reading the script, although it will be when I finally load it, hopefully tomorrow, and it won't contain the entire content of the material that I was hoping to present. However, I want to present this to commemorate the dual day in which it is both my brother's birthday and it is Palm Sunday. And I'm going to consider the upload that I hope to do tomorrow also having been done today because of this video. But anyone who watches this video will realize it is a temporary replacement and a placeholder for the real one, which should be coming out tomorrow. With that said, I used an old text-to-speech program that's using the Microsoft Voice David to read the script. So it's going to sound rather mechanical, and if you don't want to hear it, that's fine. You can wait for the better presentation, or you could compare either. However, this is the first of 3 sample stories for my Time Agency series. This one was done hopefully to give you an idea of what the time agents do, how they operate, and the general tenor of the project that I am working on. These are not the most exciting adventures. They're short, and they're not going to be the sort of challenges that are the epic scope where they have to save the entire universe, their biggest adventure ever. These were intended to be fairly mundane, middle-of-the-road missions that they're going on that is still hopefully amusing at the very least for the novelty of getting to know the time agents and getting to know the story. Now keep in mind, certain details of the time agency haven't been worked out yet. I don't have a name for one of the main characters, and I'm referring to him as Sky last name for this script. That name will be changed, and I will be giving a proper name to the controller. In fact, I already have one, but the name is not used in this story. And I might come back and revisit this and the other 2 sample stories, fleshing them out and reworking them to fit into the main continuity. But right now, I'm simply presenting them as a proof of concept, and as such, I've kept the stories relatively simple. Keep that in mind if you do listen to this, or if you listen to the better version tomorrow. But I hope that someone does listen to this and enjoys it, because it was the one that I actually released on the 29th of March 2026, even if it does not include the end of the episode, and even if it is a text-to-speech voice using a primitive text-to-speech program. But I will try to rectify this tomorrow on the 30th of March 2026. But as I said, officially, I've released this on the 29th of March 2026, both in the fact that I've released this video and in the fact that the other video is simply a remake of this one. And I hope that this doesn't turn too many people off. Though to be fair, my channel is new and hasn't actually gotten that many viewers yet, so it may not be that big of a deal. Nevertheless, I shall now present you with the first sample story for the Time Agency series. Faded Echoes in a Dying Ideal. I hope you enjoy.
Imagine, if you will, that we are in a world that blends technicolor and dull gray swirling patterns of energy that look like mist or clouds in the background. A world where odd creatures occupy a dreamlike landscape, but a dreamlike landscape when the dream is ending. This is a realm of thought, a metaphysical realm where a shared universal unconscious for humanity and individual human aspiration reach, and where the thoughts of man take shape in archetypal forms, reflecting current beliefs and ideals. Here symbols move as if alive, or dot a landscape that is shifting, and gradually breaking apart, seemingly turning to dust, and dissipating, with energy being finally pulled into the sky, toward a large, black void. Here dreams die, and ideals crumble. It is a fading, collapsing world, a last gasp of a dying dream. It is in this strange landscape that our story begins. And our story begins with the arrival in this landscape of a sphere. The sphere appears in a darkened world with a gray landscape, some flashes of color remain in the sky, buried beneath what appears to be gray clouds made of light, not vapor. There is a door that opens, allowing two figures to emerge from the sphere. Both in black suits with white lapels, white cuffs, a broad white stripe along the bottom, and wearing a red cravat necktie. One, a short woman, with deep red hair, and deep green eyes. The other a pale-skinned man with black hair and black eyes. They are time agents. They came here to both witness this world as it collapses, and to ensure that it collapses smoothly and its components fall into that great void in the sky, and to prevent that void from becoming clogged. The two figures step out, and look around. The arrival. The two figures emerge from the sphere, exiting the silver ball to enter a dull gray world, its surface shimmering from darkness into something almost solid, then falling back again to something more luminal and ethereal, a move up, then down, before settling into the landscape's aged air. The world that they have come to was not a world at all. It was the memory of one, a gray expanse stretching toward horizons that shifted and blurred like watercolors left in the rain. Above, the sky hung low and heavy, not clouds but something other, clouds of light, perhaps, or the spent breath of dying concepts, color bleeding through in thinning stretches of aurora, desperate threads standing in firm defiance before succumbing to their inevitable fate, and joining the listless gray. And Jill Sherford stepped forward first. Her boots found no purchase on the ground that was not quite ground, and was more the suggestion of earth, more like the shape a foot might leave in a dream already fading. Behind her, Sky last name followed, his black eyes taking in the vista with the calm of a man who had witnessed endings before. And Jill oddly began to do a bit of a skipping dance like walk. Sky watched whilst remaining still for a moment, then walked to catch up to her before she go too far ahead. Before them, the landscape breathed its last. Structures that might once have been buildings, or rather, representations of philosophies made solid, stood tilting toward collapse, their surfaces rippling like heat rising from summer stone. Here and there, arches dissolved mid-curve. Towers flickered between existence and memory, their edges softening into mist. The air itself hummed with the sound of things forgetting how to be. It is a landscape of form given to abstraction, living representation, archetypes. But no longer in living color, and being slowly drained away. Leaving a faded, half-made, distorted landscape populated by living symbols and bulwark landmarks that are chipping away, a fading, decaying world, a world of dying dreams. And above it all, the void, which was present, and pulling them all into itself. Sky last name spoke, in a manner that to him was a bit bespoke, and a light trace of sarcasm in his voice, though what he said was not sarcastic, and he said, "So these are the archetypal forms we came to witness in collapse." And Jill looked to him, in serene monotone, and said yes. The controller came over their communication systems, from their suits. That is indeed correct. Agents, these ideas are still held by some, and you won't be able to dislodge all stuck points, but make sure that drain in the sky doesn't clog and make sure most of the ruined ideas enter it. We don't need people fixated, it's time for them to move on. It hung in the sky like an open grave, but a living grave, ready to consume the dead, a black circle rimmed with the frayed light of 1,000 dying ideas. Around its edges, energy curled and twisted, caught in the ideological pull of that black hole. Some remnants spiraled inward slowly, as if reluctant. Others simply ceased, blinked out, consumed. The void of lost ideas. The great consuming darkness where dreams went when they could no longer hold their shape. The dissolving world. There's still some cohesion left, Angel observed, her voice carrying the strange calm of one who speaks of weather, or of traffic, or of other ordinary things. She gestured toward a cluster of structures ahead, towers that leaned at angles impossible for any architect, arches that led to nothing, buildings that seemed to argue with themselves, their very forms caught mid-dispute. A city designed by philosophers in the middle of a war of ideas. Not enough to hold, though, she continued. It's already splintering. Sky tilted his head upward, watching as a hill fort in the distant gray crumbled. It had been something once, some sort of symbol of some forgotten ideal, perhaps some dream of permanence or defiance. Now it fell to pieces like ash caught in an unfelt wind, the golden dust rising, spiraling, joining the endless drift toward the void. Waves of color moved through the air, rainbow and crimson and blue, but intermixed now with gray, the gray eventually prevailing as the color lost its vibrance, as it was fated to, for it is substance dislodged from its vitality. Always fading until its final collapse. It was a world bleeding out, desaturated, the color draining from these dreams as they failed to find coherence, failed to find the strength to remain alive. It's more like dissolving, Sky said softly. Like ice becoming waves? No longer frozen, no longer holding. Like a tower made of dust, blown by winds into the open sky and scattered. A fine sight, in its way. They walked forward together, their boots leaving no imprint on the shifting knot ground. The statue. Before them stood a statue. The statue was a fist raised against the gray, seemingly carved in granite that might have already naturally been gray, not having lost its color, or might have already been desaturated, Sky could not tell, either way. It had the look of defiance. A symbol of defiance defying its own fate. But it seemingly was crumbling to dust. Slowly at first, then faster. Angel saw it, her gaze turned to a symbol of rebellion and defiance that she would never truly embrace herself, and she said humans need to learn defiance in spirit is never a solution, and a rebel heart can know no peace. She regarded it with something that might have been sorrow, or what was her closest to sorrow, or it may have been recognition, a distant echo from her own past, that lead itself to sorrow and of brothers lost. A symbol of defiance, she said in serene monotone. Defiant of its own fate. How oddly appropriate. We'll dissolve it, she added, reaching into her pocket for a device, a wand of metal, hollow at the tip like a tube, a handle below, a few controls and a button that served as a trigger. Sky stayed her hand. No need. We can't expect everything to dissolve anyway. And symbols often last longer than the things that they represent. This one is dissolving on its own. Let it go in its own. Let's conserve energy for the real blockages. Angel paused, then lowered her wand, replacing it in her pocket. They moved on, leaving the fading fist to its slow surrender. Sky last name offers a slight smile to Angel, who acknowledges but her face remains the same, and they both walk on, continuing their examination of this dissolving place. The bridge and the birds. Ahead, a bridge spanned nothing, a structure that had once connected ideas now too far apart to bridge. It began to ripple like a wave, its arches shimmering into an aurora that flows in a fluid-like manner, flashing indignantly as if in protest, before silently dissipating into the gray atmosphere of this realm. In the sky above, odd shapes moved, birds, perhaps, or the memory of birds, or symbols that had once been birds before they became something else, distorted, warping, becoming less distinct, losing their edges, becoming energy patterns, becoming shapeless displays of energy, before being pulled inexorably toward the black void. The agents paused, watching the process with the detached professionalism of those who had seen this before. Do you see that? Sky asked, gesturing toward the space where the bridge had been. Some of the patterns remain, even as the structure fails. They refuse completely to dissolve, some last longer than others, as if some part of them still believes. Some part of everything believes, Angel replied. That's what makes dissolution so slow. That's what makes our work necessary. They continued their melancholy tour of a dying dream. The flower. Angel stopped suddenly. Her boots sank slightly into the shifting ground that was not quite ground. Look, she said, her voice still serene, still carrying that strange calm. Ahead, a small patch of color persisted. A single flower, its petals a vibrant crimson, defiant in the bleached landscape around it. It should have faded by now, everything else had. Yet it clung, flickering like lightning on a distant cloud, holding on, but not for long. Sky bent down, studying it. How strange, he said. This one should have faded by now. It's holding on, Angel said, her fingers hovering above the flower without touching it. But not for very much longer. They watched as the crimson began to flicker, the petals losing their edges, dissolving into a fine mist that drifted upward toward the void, a last breath, a final ascent. Sky stood, offering his hand. Angel took it, rising to her feet. Ideas don't die, he said quietly. They just change shape. And some shapes are harder to let go of than others, she replied, glancing once more at the empty space where the flower had been. The shadowy figures. The agents walked on through the fading landscape, their footsteps leaving no trace upon the shifting ground. Around them, the air thrummed with the whisper of disintegrating symbols, half-formed creatures of light and shadow darting between the ruins of forgotten ideals like birds in some forgotten, decayed oil painting. But it was the figures that drew their attention now. They emerged from the gray like shadows, given weight humanoid, but not quite human, their forms indistinct, blurring at the edges as if even they were not certain of their own existence. Some groaned, the sound of old grief, of ideas that had been beloved once and now found themselves unwanted. Some wandered aimlessly, their movements carrying the aimlessness of dreams that had lost their purpose. Some struggled to survive, clawing at the ground that wasn't quite ground, trying to find purchase, trying to hold on. These were the remnants of ideologies themselves, the ghosts of movements, the husks of causes that had once burned bright in the hearts of millions. They had been figures of conviction once, believers, dreamers, fighters. Now they were only shadows, their edges eroding, their voices growing thin. In the distant corners, some symbols remained relatively intact: a red flag, though its color had faded to a pale rust, a golden star reduced to a dull gleam, protest signs now illegible, their letters reduced to random markings. An upside-down man on a banner tied with a rope, his meaning lost, his purpose forgotten. But here, in the center, the figures clustered together, drawn to one another as if proximity might preserve what isolation could not. They huddled in groups, these shadow people, holding fast to one another as if the weight of shared despair might anchor them to existence. They did not speak if they had ever known how, but their moans filled the air, a chorus of loss, of resistance, of the desperate clinging of ideas that could not accept their own obsolescence. Some simply languished, their forms growing thinner, their outlines less defined, dissolving into the gray even as they tried to remain. Others wandered, their paths circular, purposeless, their movements carrying no more meaning than the drift of dust. But these were the ones that mattered. Some struggled. They fought. They reached toward the agents as Sky and Angel approached, their hands grasping, their mouths opening in silent screams that carried no sound but somehow still carried pleading. The blockage. Sky turned to Angel, his expression darkening. Now this is a blockage we need to handle. The figures had gathered into a tight cluster, pressing against one another, their shadows merging into something almost solid. They were resisting the pull of the void, the dissolution, the forgetting. They clung to one another with the desperation of ideas that could not accept their own death. Angel and Sky removed their wands in unison. The metal caught what little light remained, glinting with a cold, functional gleam. They took aim. They fired. Beams of electromagnetic energy struck the cluster of shadowy figures. The figures began to waver and pull apart. Some began to dissolve immediately, their forms transitioning into nebulous energy, and drifting away, rising toward the void. But others resisted, and fought, holding their shapes through sheer determination, through the unyielding belief in them by the minds that gave them shape and form. Minds unwilling to let go of an ideal that can no longer be. The agents maintain the electromagnetic beams. The goal is simply to disperse them. The struggle continued. The shadows writhed. The beams held. Eventually some figures merged with others, or drifted away, but in the end, they began to dissolve. They dissolved into the gray like ink in water, their silhouettes stretching, warping, shattering into shards of fading light. Most simply ceased. But a few fled. And Jill lowered her wand with a soft motion. They won't last long, she said, watching the last stragglers vanish. They never do. Sky also pocketed his wand. No, Sky agreed, his black eyes reflecting the swirling void above. But they'll fight until they can't. That is the nature of belief. And Jill then spoke. They ran. Shadows being kept alive and moving by the minds that shaped them. Why do humans persist so in what has already ended? Sky looked at her, and replied, it is the nature of man, to hold on to things important to him, and to not want to let go of things from the past, especially if they were defined by them. And Jill looked out at the decayed landscape, and in the same serene monotone once more spoke, it seems tragic though. Adhering to what is past, for even holding to these views does not truly revive them, they can only have a dreary half-life, a shadowy existence. If not let go, the vitality has moved on to a new zeitgeist, a new era. It is a disservice to these ideals to not let them pass, and to reform and renew. Holding them here does nothing but prevent that, and does not truly stop the new, it only blocks it, forces it into a suppressed but still potent state. It makes matters worse. Sky looked at Jill, and replied, the angels in heaven cling to their decisions, too. Never wavering. And Jill replied, there is a difference. Angels cannot waver, and angels are aveternal, seeing all time at once, and for an angel, it is not about a present, for all time is now, and choice is being, and will is absolute. Men have wills that change, and men are beings who experience the passage and changes in time. Sky smiled faintly, that is a difference, but the echoes of that are in man, too, and man can be as defined by his ideals and beliefs as any angel. It is sometimes what makes that person feel their existence has meaning or direction. And Jill then responded, it is still a waste. Sky did not protest, and the two continued their tour into the dying realm of shadows they had found themselves in to do the work they came to do. They passed by many objects or creatures, and sometimes objects that behaved as creatures, their forms streaming behind them like tattered flags, dissolving even as they moved, their edges fraying, their substance thinning, until they disappeared into the ether of the atmosphere, and drifted toward the void which remained ever present. The two pass by faded remnants of desires, protest signs no longer legible, spikes and spears collapsing into fragments, and shadowy figures who collapse into waves of amorphous energy, being compelled to hold form as much as possible, reflecting the obsessions of the minds that forced them to hold air shape. The ever-shifting skyline had become full of the cloud-like energy being pulled toward the void. The dying world. The two continued through the fading landscape. The sky above swirled with the remnants of 1,000 failed arguments, their essence bleeding into one another until they became indistinct streaks of dull energy. Here and there, a flash of crimson or azure flickered like a dying ember before being extinguished by the relentless pull of the void. The ground beneath their feet seemed to breathe, rising and falling in slow waves as though the very fabric of this realm was sighing its last. To their left, a cluster of twisted spires leaned precariously, their surfaces etched with withering marks of damage as if by wind, on walls that glowed faintly before fading into nothingness. One tower, taller than the rest, collapsed in upon itself with a soundless implosion, its structure dissolving into a fine powder that hung suspended for a moment before joining the upward drift, transforming into an aura like an electromagnetic field. Shadows lengthened and shortened without source, stretching across the terrain like hands reaching for something just out of reach. It was a world of endings. A world once vibrant with life, shaping the direction of the material world, and yet now collapsing and unmoored from impact, superseded by a new era. And at the center of it all, the void. The patient, ever-present void. A great dark hole that consumed the destination of every idea whose time had passed. The agents walked on, their black suits dark against the fading light, and their red cravats the only color left in a world becoming only gray. The conglomerate. They had walked for some time, observing the dissolution of the dying world, when they came upon a larger problem. It was vast. A great shadowy mass, a creature made of hundreds of shadowy figures merged into one. It was larger than any of the individual shadows that they had encountered before. It was larger than the other shadows, and something greater, something more powerful, a combined whole, a unified vision made manifest. It stood in the middle of the fading landscape like a dark monument to a commitment no longer viable, but refusing to admit its own loss of vitality. Its edges sharp where the individual aspects had fused, its shape almost military in form, as if a formation of soldiers had frozen mid-march, caught in the moment before dissolution. This was no accident. This was a conglomeration, a shared vision, an alliance of ideals that had held together in the minds of their believers, and thus held together in this realm. Many, united, refusing to separate, refusing to break apart. It was a single entity, and it was a blockage that risked the new dawn of a new ideal. Sky stopped walking. He said with an emotional detachment, common to him, but wryly, well, Angel. Look at this. She did. He said it's a shared vision, she observed. A unified ideology. It is many minds holding the same beliefs, all at once. This is a possible source of a blockage. The controller's voice came through again. Agents, I see it. It is a rather large thing, isn't it? You will of course need to dispel it. If it stays here, it will anchor this ideology to the active world when the new ideas come. If it enters the void, it may clog the drain. If it flees the other way, it will block the portal whence the new will eventually flow. These three outcomes must be avoided. None are desirable. Sky replied, do you have anything actually useful to say, controller? The controller said, now darling one, needn't parse me down like that. I'll need to try electrocuting it with your wands. Sky replied, there is no way our wands will be able to break this up. The controller said, well, try anyway, I'll look into the matter. Sky replied, can we at least get more power channeled to us by the sphere? The controller said, of course. But only after you try with your wands first. You do know the procedure, Sky my love. Sky replied, just look into a real solution. We'll waste our time here with our wands. Angel said, are you ready to begin? Sky looked rather annoyingly at her, though not annoyed by her, and said to Angel, yes, I am ready to waste our time and energy. The two pulled their wands from their pockets. They turned them up to a high voltage, and I discharged them. It had little effect. They turn up the power. They discharge again. It had slightly more but still little result. They turned their wands all the way up, and fired. The difference was noticeable, but still far too small. Angel called the controller, we have discharged our wands up to full power, with negligible results. Please grant the sphere's power. The controller's playful voice comes over communications, and she says, oh of course, my darling, the power is ours. Now. Sky replied to the controller, finally, let's waste more time a bit more usefully. The two see a signal light on their wands, indicating that it can now channel power from the sphere. They direct their wands to the mass, and discharge them. The mass moves, and begins to disintegrate but still manages to hold together. Sky says whoever who holds this really wants it to stay. Too bad it can't. The mass then, surprisingly, dislodges and flies off into the ether, and manages to slip behind amorphous energies free-floating. The absconsion. Sky and Angel stood still for a few seconds. Sky said, well, that was unfortunate. Angel replied, indeed not. The controller's voice came over their comms, sharp and stern. Agents, that conglomerate is still intact. It's heading toward the portal. If it reaches the portal, it will likely block the entry. The wills that created it seem to want to direct it that way now. If they can't remain dominant, or in the delusion of dominant anyway, and will use this to block the entry of the new ideal. Sky replied, and we made it worse by that brilliant zap it with your wands strategy, which I told you would not work. The controller hissed back, oh do pipe down, the wands zapping the mass did not cause it to dislodge, the wills behind it were already preparing that, and now they wish to use this to, at least on some level, intentionally prevent the new ideas that will supplant theirs from coming in. Sky settled a bit downward. So, what are we to do exactly? The control replied, you cannot let it escape. Sky replied, of course not, but the question is, how do we go about stopping it? It's massive, it's a powerful fixation, and it's not exactly making itself known. The controller said it will have to become visible again when it seeks to block the portal. Sky replied, if it blocks the portal it'll be much harder to dislodge it, and besides, we need to leave this place, it will fade eventually as the zeitgeist resets. The controller said in wicked tones, well, then, the best solution seems simple. Go to the portal and wait for the mass to emerge, and get it just before it creates the blockage. Sky replies rather harshly, that is hardly a simple matter, and requires some pretty good timing. Controller said, well, no one said being a time agent was easy. And besides, timing is your speciality, isn't it, Sky? Anil then chimed in, saying the controller is correct. This is our best option. And we had best get started now. Sky says then, well, let's get back to the sphere, that way we can outrun the mass at least. Angel replied, presuming we get to the sphere in time. With that, the two time agents made their way rapidly back to the sphere.